everyone. Welcome to episode 9 of ZipChat. We're so glad to have you here with us today. I'm Jill Hurston with Synerzip. I'm on our marketing team. And with that, I'm going to turn it over right away to our VP of Engineering and host, Mike Watson. Mike, take it over, please.
Thanks, Jill, and welcome everyone to this episode of ZipChat. It's a topic that's quite interesting, cloud agnostic versus cloud native, and maybe, hopefully, we can help answer which direction you should go, or at least highlight some of the challenges there. This topic was interesting. It was brought to my attention a couple of months ago through a post from our CEO, and I was of the opinion that everyone's going cloud native. I don't know why I thought that, but maybe it's just the people I'm talking to are like much more in the native direction. But then what I heard from that post, and just asking more questions, is there's a lot of people that still believe being agnostic is quite important. So with that, I think we'll get into the topic. Just a reminder, the ZipChat is a casual format. We don't have those slides, and we do encourage audience participation. And if you have a question, we would like you to verbally ask it. So we'll open up your mic and let you ask the question and chat with us that way. So with me today, I have Mike Kubian, who's the CTO at Kazoo. I've got Todd Crossland, who's the Global Head of Healthcare and Life Sciences at Snowflake, and Max Solodky, sorry, Max, Director of Strategy and Planning at the Department of Health and Human Services in Texas. All right, so let's start off with a poll, just to get an idea of where people are at in their cloud journey. The poll is, how many cloud providers is your organization currently using? So we'll let that poll pop up. So in gathering the panelists, these are people that are in my network or in Synerzip's network, and each of them has an interesting story, and hopefully we'll be able to get to that throughout this podcast or through this webcast.
Okay, Mike, I've closed the poll, so here are the results.
All right, so either people are using one or many, which makes sense. So you're either fully agnostic or you're on a single cloud. That does not surprise me and should not surprise any of us on the panel. So let's jump into the topic. So I'm going to start by asking a question for Max. So this cloud journey has been going on for a while now, and it seems like the questions change every year, or at least very frequently. So what's your view on that? Like how cloud has evolved and what challenges or questions are coming up as we go?
Yeah, sure, Mike. Well, hello and welcome everyone. So yeah, this question, agnostic versus native, I guess to me, it's not really a new question, right? And if I can just say, within IT community, I think we like to discuss, analyze, debate things a lot, right? Sometimes maybe too much. I mean, it is a part of the job, but maybe we enjoy it too much. The Java versus .NET is probably my favorite, has been out there for years and still fun, right? But I can say in terms of the journey, back in the day, we used to spend a lot of time discussing Oracle database versus IBM, and back then that was a huge decision, like the entire systems would be based on it and everything is kind of downhill from there. So once you made their decisions, as vendors matured, right, they introduced more applications, middleware, and depending on what choice you made, you are more likely, for convenience of it, for performance of it, to keep going with that vendor. And over time, there was one more question that came up, right? Oh, are we too much? We dedicated, committed too much to one vendor, the vendor lock-in, and so that was a big question, and we had to mitigate the risks, of one vendor maybe not being the most reliable at some point in the future. Maybe we're not getting the best cost, right? So we had to deal with that. I mean, soon after, or at some point, I guess cloud providers emerged, and you know, with some basic offerings, and then we kind of evolved into a question, you know, try or not to try, right? Is it real? Is it here to stay? What does Gartner think about this cloud thing? And you know, early adopters, as I would call them, kind of prove the model. It's real. We should you know, think about it. So then we evolved into a question. Okay, well, do we use the cloud? Do we stay on premise? You know, what are the performance, security implications, the previous investments, the total cost of ownership? You know, many companies, and it's a hard question, right? But many companies adopted the hybrid approach to that one. More time passes by, you know, we're using cloud, more players enter, more competition. Then we get to a question of which cloud should we use, right? Now we have choices. So go through that scenario, make the decision, you know, fall in love, more competition, more services, costs go down. You know, we start getting used to the whole convenience of using cloud services, the easy provisioning, low cost, and then we get more and more kind of involved with the provider. And then, so that's kind of the full circle. Now we're into the vendor cloud lock-in dilemma, which is somewhat kind of what we might be in a way discussing today, cloud agnostic or native. So to me, that's the journey. But one thing I'd say, the most constant thing throughout at least my IT life, we always try to solve a problem, right? We always try to enable business, either help with revenue generation, cost cutting, customer satisfaction. And then ultimately, in my experience, it's really the more tools, the more options you have. And in this case, cloud providers, cloud options, the better it is in general.
Yeah, thanks for that, Max. So on that note, so I think there's a lot of permutations that you can choose, right? It's not one or you know, all of them. It could be some kind of combination of both. So Mike, I know that you have sort of wandered into a multi-cloud solution. Do you want to describe sort of the different possibilities when you're on the vendor or the cloud native side?
Yeah, and for cloud native side, particularly when you're talking about the what I consider the commodity aspects of compute power or storage, it's not uncommon to see, in our case, we have a lot of our compute power that we're using Google, but we're still using S3 for a lot of our storage. And a lot of the cloud providers make those kind of operations very easy to do. So in some cases, depending on your particular business needs, you're not locked in necessarily to the native one. We do some Google storage as well. So it's easy to mix and match some of those common concepts like that. And taking advantage of the different cloud providers and the different managed services that they have. If it's an area that you don't have a particular expertise in-house, you can utilize different aspects of it, be it a database service or another common use, the content delivery networks. There's different ones that you can use, and you can utilize mix and match environments across cloud providers.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're not stuck if you're in the agnostic mode of just going on one cloud provider. In fact, as you mentioned, you have a really good example of that. And I'm guessing everyone in the panel has seen that same kind of thing. Being agnostic really just means leveraging the services that they offer versus trying to make use a generic tool to be able to port cross platforms. So Todd, on that same vein, you know, if you are going agnostic, it's not, I mean, there's some scenarios there as well. Can you describe those?
Yeah, and I think, you know, when you think about the future, and obviously we're a little bit from a selfish perspective, when you think about data, you know, we see data as being collaborative. And so when you look in through that scope, it means that who you might collaborate with may not be on the same cloud or in the same region that you're in. And there are a lot of other drivers that may dictate which clouds you need to use and different tools and what have you. So, you know, having and building a stack that is cloud agnostic is something that we feel especially from a data perspective, is crucially important. From an app perspective, kind of like what Mike was talking about, to have an app, to build an app cloud native makes all kinds of sense because you're in complete control. When it comes down, when do you need to be agnostic is when you need to think about what is your ecosystem and who are you working with. And I think when you look at something like Snowflake that says we're a common platform, we're agnostic across all three of our awesome cloud providers. We're doing that because of the fact that they want to have that flexibility from a cloud perspective and who they're working with, and the way that Snowflake brings data together without having to copy it and FTP it or what have you. It basically, from our perspective, it forced us to be cloud agnostic because there are, everyone that's out there that's an AWS customer has a client or a partner that's an Azure or GCP customer, and you can switch all those names around and the truth still remains the same. And it's going to be even more prevalent as just in the cloud wars, right? As GCP continues to expand and Azure and AWS, right? I mean, we all know kind of the, who came in first and who's been chasing and who's the new person and what have you. And I think, the competition is great, right? It's a wonderful thing. And it only helps us, but it's just, we enjoy the ability to sit back and to allow and watch the different cloud providers, compete against each other. And we also greatly appreciate the partnership that we have with all of them, which allows us, we couldn't be cloud agnostic, without having great partnerships with all of those providers. So.
If you're on the cloud agnostic side, Todd, it seems like it's not, you have an interesting situation with Snowflake where you support all the clouds equally. Like your functionality is the same regardless of what cloud you're on. That's at quite a great expense, but I'm sure that makes sense for your business.
Yeah,
as a managed service provider, that totally makes sense. For most people, it's really more about portability, not trying to replicate the same functionality in multiple clouds. Although there could be business needs that force you in that direction. So being agnostic, usually doesn't mean work on all clouds. It means have the ability to move to another cloud if the business conditions need you to.
Right.
And there's definitely expense to that, as we'll.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. No, absolutely. And but what's the value you put on, right, from a disaster recovery perspective or whatever your reason is? What's the value of having that flexibility? So.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, you have to make really conscious thought about the additional tooling you need and the technologies you choose and how that's going to work, so that you have to factor those costs versus the cost of being locked in, which is harder to calculate, of course.
Yeah.
But there are some businesses out there that won't work with some cloud providers, and I won't mention any names, but it's definitely a real world problem for those of you out there. All right, so let's move on to another poll. So this question here is, how did your organization find itself using a major cloud provider? And the interesting thing here is, and I'm sure this happened a lot, especially early on, is that developers would somehow, or managers at organizations would somehow get access to the cloud, and then next thing you know, the CFO is seeing a cloud bill. That's like the last selection here. But I think more and more, it's much more of a planned initiative, either by engineering leadership or by the executive team.
Great, Mike. I'll just give another second or two for people to answer that poll, because we have a few answers that are coming in. Looks like people have stopped, so I'm going to go ahead and close it and show you the results.
Wow.
All right. So, no one admitted shadow IT. You're out there.
That's interesting. I was trying to vote myself, and I'm right there with 67%.
Engineering-driven initiative. Yeah. Like I say, I think as we've matured and the cloud has become like a real option, it's like I think you said, Max, where it's the early adopters have proven it's real, and now it's something that's on everyone's mind all the way up the chain. Not just developers, not just engineering managers, etc. All right, so I kind of want to go into a little bit of storytelling mode, but I'm going to let the panelists tell their stories. So Mike, we were talking offline, and you have an interesting journey where you started on one cloud and ended on another. Can you talk about how that kind of worked out?
Yeah, for us originally, we started out like a lot of startups. We started out on AWS and we're pretty well involved there. But at the time, we were still using mostly just compute and storage. And then we had a business need that came in that we really needed to ramp up our flexibility. And this was driven by an acquisition that we'd made with another company. And we needed to really speed up our deployment process and so on and move into more containerization use of Kubernetes. And in our particular case at the time, the Kubernetes support on AWS was lacking for what we needed in our scenario. And so this was more of a business-driven decision that then they came to us and said, what's a better way for us to do this? And we ended up moving from AWS predominantly into GCP for the running in our application. And while our content delivery network and our storage, we kept on S3 and CloudFront. But it was interesting in that it provided us an opportunity to do this move, and we had to answer that question. Okay, what parts are easy to move? What parts are not? If we move to Google, what do we, same cloud native versus agnostic? Do we use this Google service that may tie us in, or do we still keep it clean? And it really boiled down to making sure at the end of the day we answered what the business needed us to do. In this case, it was really speed up our deployment process, really speed up those, and that's what drove our technology decisions on that. So we're in somewhat of a mixed cloud today, though we're predominantly GCP. Who knows, in a couple of years, we may make a different decision. And as Todd pointed out earlier, one of the nice things is having these multiple cloud providers, having a lot of these features have some level of competitiveness, gives you an opportunity as a technology leader to actually negotiate amongst the cloud providers and get better pricing. And that's a good chunky argument, particularly with the business, is going to be around cost.
Yeah, and you're not locked into using just GCP. I mean, you're already using some AWS services, so whatever is out there that's going to help you move the quickest is probably going to be what you use next, right? So if you need AI, ML services.
Yeah, we made the conscious decision to use something like Kubernetes and manage it with Spinnaker for our application work, similar to people choosing to use Snowflake in order to have their data be transitional. So there's definitely tools out there that will help you do that.
Awesome. So Todd, let's go into your story a little bit at Snowflake. So Snowflake, if I remember right, it was tied directly with Amazon, is that right? And then now it's across all the providers. How did that go?
Yeah, so I think it's and even for myself personally and being in the healthcare and life sciences space is I joke that my career's been a history of hurry up and wait. Let's all be honest, in healthcare and life sciences, we're not the most quick to embrace new technologies. And I think when I look back, I'll give you just my personal story about even, I think it was prior to Snowflake, about 3 months prior. This was summer of 2015. I was at PDX, CIO, outpatient retail pharmacy platform, very happy SynerZip client. There's my shout out. The way that we went to cloud, that's why I was joking about the shadow IT stuff, is that the way we went to public cloud, because we had private cloud, we had AT&T co-location facilities, as everybody was doing for private cloud, all that. And I literally grabbed my corporate card. I had all my leadership team in the office. I went to my computer, logged into AWS, swiped my credit card, right, keyed in all the information, and said, we're cloud. So from that executive perspective, I think it was important for me to kind of set the tone and say, look, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And when you look at it, I think one of the big challenges that everybody has is lifting and shifting, legacy architectures. And man, is that difficult. Having lived through that partially myself, and then to juxtapose that against something that's cloud native and built directly in the cloud. And so that kind of, 3 months after, we started in cloud, Snowflake came along and became GA in the fall of 2015, summer, fall timeframe, and came across it. And yes, to your point, to kind of go to that, is that Snowflake was born in AWS. Back then, AWS was clearly the leader, and if you're going to build something, that's probably the place to build it, right? So, so Snowflake started as this: we store structured and semi-structured data as a first-class citizen, and that was the holy cow, right, moment of, you mean I can natively query, JSON with SQL schema on read, to get a little techie there for a moment? Yes, that's what it meant. And so there was a huge desire for all this streaming, media, and advertising data. Gaming data was a big deal as well. So for that community being on AWS, no problem, right? No problem at all. There was no problem. The minute that you entered the retail realm or the healthcare realm, and then suddenly things got a little bit interesting. And as I found, building products on top of Snowflake, on top of AWS, I had certain customers in the retail and outpatient pharmacy space that absolutely said, we don't care that we can't see it. We don't care that you're providing a service, built on top of Snowflake. But they did ask where it was, and we're transparent with our clients and said, yeah, it's built on AWS. And they said, nope, we're not doing it. So, so I think both from my perspective as a customer building analytics platforms, and Snowflake then recognizes that you can't just, be on AWS. You're going to have to expand to the other clouds, and we did that. Nielsen was our sponsor for Azure, and was a great assistance, and Microsoft's been a great partner ever since. And then McKesson in the healthcare and life sciences space was our partner for GCP. They're a tremendous partner as well. And so we just kind of iterated our way, through the different cloud providers. And today, I think it's interesting just to see everyone's opinion. I get to work with startups. I get to work with Fortune 5 companies, all the way in between. And it's really, really interesting for me to see everyone's different strategies around single cloud, multi-cloud, and going back to that app thing. I think what I see a lot of is, yeah, we're going to build an app cloud native, but then that data's got to be flexible. And again, because of our data sharing capability, we have to, the big Fortune 5 companies, they're working with 15, 20, 100 different organizations that are going to be across all 3 clouds. So for them to fully take advantage of what we call the data cloud, you have to be cloud agnostic. So we really look at ourselves as a layer, as a data cloud layer that's abstracted away, obviously absolutely dependent upon the cloud providers underneath.
So Todd, and if you can give us a little bit of details about the plumbing, maybe, like, is there certain technologies that you're leveraging to make it easier to be on multiple clouds? Like, what's that?
Yes. Containerization, absolutely. And this is not my area of expertise, but it's the containerization is massive. We have what's called the cloud services layer. So it's a 3-layer architecture: the cloud services, the compute, and the storage. And that cloud services is absolutely containerized. And that's what delivers Snowflake as a service without that, cloud services layer. And what's really cool about it is that if you're running, a Tableau visualization tool sitting on Azure, and your Snowflake data is sitting in Azure, but you also are replicating it to GCP, our cloud services layer can recognize if your Azure data becomes unavailable, it'll actually switch it over to GCP. So there's a lot that's been done at that cloud services layer to allow a business continuity perspective to make sure that your business users are completely clueless that they just switch clouds. So the containerization is by far the biggest concept that we use that allows us to have these deployments and for our clients to have that common experience. When they log into Snowflake, we have what's called an organizational feature. So, imagine your organization, you have 15 Snowflake accounts spread across, 5 in each one of the cloud providers. You're given one seamless experience across all 3 clouds. So I think you'll see more of that in the coming, years to come as more and more is abstracted from the cloud providers.
On the DevOps side, are you using something like Terraform?
I don't believe so. I'd have to check in on that. And so I could probably chat on the side while we're chatting, and I'll find that out.
Yeah, it's just interesting to know, what tools you're using. So it seems like it's working. So
yeah. No, the phenomenal team that's doing this. So yeah, absolutely.
All right. So expanding on that a little bit. So Max, you're in a slightly different situation there in your department where you have access probably to all these tools. And so what decision factors are there in terms of cloud native versus cloud agnostic, and how do you look at working with the cloud there?
Yeah, so we do, right? So in Texas, we have a Department of Information Resources, and that's a central organization that's responsible for all data center cloud operations. So all agencies, including Health and Human Services, are really required to use them. And so if you think about it, how many agencies are within Texas and variety of use cases, so you really cannot be limited by one provider, whether it's cloud or anything else. So that choice has to be there. Plus, as a policy, all vendors have to have equal opportunity, to showcase, provide their services, so they can join the list of vendors at the DIR. So in essence, we have access to everything you can think of. But if I kind of step away from my, primary job, and I like the story, I have the newest favorite story. So within a startup, we, small team, and one of the first decisions we had to make, as you can imagine, is, which cloud are we going to use? And the typical discussion came up, AWS versus Azure, right? Not a big surprise. Small team, different backgrounds, so that didn't help. So ultimately decided just to use both, right? Hey, why don't we use both, split the workloads, and just see how we feel in a couple of months from now. So regrouped, looked at the cost, performance, just flexibility, ease of use, and ultimately very close. Didn't use anything sophisticated, database services, application services, Beanstalk, right? Nothing really fancy, a typical web app kind of a stack. But, ultimately felt more comfortable with AWS, and everything got migrated. The migration, so a bit of an overhead, right? An extra step that probably could have been avoided. Again, fairly straightforward, since nothing sophisticated was provisioned, and the offerings from both platforms are very similar. There's some technical syntax nuances, but at the conceptual level, almost you can call them the same thing. But 2 weeks later, so that's the kind of the gist of the story, we get a new requirement, and we have to develop and deploy AI-based feature function. So naturally, both providers, Azure and AWS, have very robust ML platforms. You can develop anything you would like on it, so not a problem. So development mindset kicks in, and you kind of start developing. But with a little more research, we discovered that there was actually ready to go exact set of features we were looking for AI service in the Azure cloud. And so based on that previous investment of kind of a time and effort learning, we in 2 hours kind of reprovisioned what we needed in Azure, and deployed that service, and the feature was done. So let's just say it took the whole day to do so. So really, one more time to confirm at least my belief that one cloud is good, right? 2 clouds is better, but you need to be knowledgeable enough, familiar enough with everything that's available to you.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting with the machine learning. There are a lot of models out there that you can use as is or tweak a little bit. We did a ZipChat earlier in the year with Kung Fu AI, and they talked about that. Like that's the best way to get to a good model, is to have a seeded model first. So it's interesting that you found that model and were able to move so quickly.
Yeah, it's even abstracted from that, the actual service, right? But you're right. You can definitely find the models, and you can leverage the whole transfer learning concept, and that can save you a lot of time. But I mean, on a daily basis, I think not that familiar with GCP, but Amazon, Microsoft, they keep evolving ML capabilities, where you can, I'm never on a kind of a cutting edge, so I feel like all the problems I ever have to tackle, that tend to be solved. So research and see what's available is definitely a first move.
Yeah, so one of the things that we all talked about, as we were preparing for this ZipChat was experimentation, how cloud has allowed us to really.
Mike, I'm
yes.
sorry, before we get to that, I do have a good question from the audience.
Oh yeah,
let's jump in right here. Yeah, I have, actually Gordon had submitted a question during registration, and he's actually here. So I'd like to unmute Gordon to ask his question directly. And I think Mike Kuvion might be the best to answer this one. Gordon, you're unmuted if you want to go ahead and ask. Gordon, are you there? I was just chatting with him.
Oh, I had to unmute too. That's okay.
There he is. Okay.
Yeah. No, I thought, yeah.
That's the meme of the year.
Exactly. Name's Gordon Yusuke. I'm with Endelliant. We're a professional services firm. I'm the VP of Data Science. We have a lot of clients. We have a lot of different types of projects. And of course, in our situation, all of the different cloud opportunities provide different feature sets, and they're all chasing each other and jumping each other, and we have pressure from the clients. I tend to think that inevitably multi-cloud, is going to just be part of our lives in one way or another. But I would like to ask, other than the obvious benefits of being able to cherry pick the good stuff and the downside of having to learn multiple technologies, is there any sort of one hidden or unexpected cost and one hidden or unexpected benefit from embracing a multi-cloud solution?
In my experience, along the terms of hidden cost, and it's just my personal experience of things that snuck up on me, one wasn't the storage or the compute, outside of the obvious, be careful what you let your developers go off and do on their own because they scale up, was actually network transfer data cost. It was easy to sit down and find out, okay, I need so many terabytes or petabytes of storage, and what's that cost? But if you have to move a lot of data from point A to point B, or from one cloud provider to another, be sure you factor that in. There's different solutions for solving that problem, but it's one that if you don't think about it, it can come back to bite you. I don't know, Max or Todd, if you had any other scenarios.
I was gonna definitely say that you have to be very, very careful where you put your services, your data. Definitely don't want to pipe a lot of data into the cloud, then download it back to your desktop for analysis. But I like the hidden benefit question is I think it's a tough one, and the way I would answer it is, well, the ability to fail over from one to another. But I look at it in terms of just being primed, meaning if I'm in multi-cloud scenario, I'm learning operationally every day, right? So we know exactly what it takes to run it, even if you don't use all the services, you're cherry picking, but you're familiar with the environment. So when something does come up, a new use case comes up, now you can quickly provision it and start using it. You don't have a learning curve on getting familiar or how is it done in this cloud, right? Because you're just ready to go.
So you're building that experience across.
It's still.
So an example would just be even setting up your security configuration, right, and your roles and how you manage access to the cloud itself, right? I mean, you have to start there and then go from there.
And just reinforcing Max's point, ramp up time for new developers is a bit easier because you've got set patterns that they can pick up on, as opposed to having to be an expert in AWS or an expert in GCP.
Yeah, I was going to hit on that. Both cost and benefit is the cost is culture change. You've got to do the culture change. The benefit is once you've done the culture change, you've achieved that agility that now that you have. So you parlayed right very nicely into that. So because I definitely dealt with that with people that were IBM AIX administrators, and I was like, hey, I value you as an employee, but you've got to learn. You've got to have that culture of learning that really says it doesn't, you know, I appreciate everything you've done for the last 15, 20 years, but I don't need IBM AIX administrators anymore. But they were very talented individuals, and almost all of them made it, right? Made it across the chasm to embracing new technology. So that's not easy. I don't want to say it is. So it's definitely, I put it on the challenge side.
Great, thank you so much. That's really interesting.
You bet.
Yeah, really good question. Thank you for that. So as we were meandering on, so the experimentation topic is what we were going into next. So each of you mentioned that one of the benefits of cloud in general is that you can move quickly, especially around experimenting. And I thought that was a really interesting point. And actually just expanding on what we just talked about on that question, by opening up each cloud separately and having the infrastructure to be able to work in those, that experimentation, can happen rapidly across all the different clouds in a safe and effective way. So, combining those two things. So, Todd, do you want to talk about your view on cloud experimentation and how you've leveraged that?
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna do it again from a culture and audience and perception perspective, and I think it is insanely important. It's easy to say that you should experiment. It's hard to sell it in a lot of cases, especially the higher you go in an organization, because of the perception of experimentation and what does it really mean to be successful or to fail. And I'll give the real life example. For full disclosure, I am a Tesla owner. So what I say about Elon Musk is my own opinion and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so when you look at if you're familiar with what Starship did, the experimental platform, and it is, right? They have every intention for Starship to take us to Mars, but everyone needs to recognize that it's an experimental platform. And the best quote from Elon Musk, if you saw the test flight, is that everything up to the apex of the flight was a planned thing, is that they expected to achieve apex and the height that it went up, however high that was. Everything past that point, right, was an experiment. So the skydiving of the actual Starship, its turn to come and attempt to land. And the best quote he had was, if you all saw the explosion, was the fact that it made the crater exactly where we wanted it to make the crater. And people saw the wonderful explosion. And what's unfortunate about that, or I guess, and what I see on places like Twitter, is that, the Elon haters were like, he can't even, land a rocket ship. And I'm like, you realize he's the first one to really land a rocket ship like that. So, so recognizing that SpaceX is an organization that embraces experimentation, and that what can be deemed a failure by many is a success for what they're doing. And so I think it's really important to make people aware and to communicate up the chain, because what may happen is, and just like in Twitter, you have a group of people that are going to watch an experiment, okay? And everyone has their opinion about it. And if you don't tell them ahead of time, the experiment is X, Y, and Z. X and Y are expected, and Z, we have no clue what's going to happen, okay? So if you do that and you lay out what the experiment is to the full audience, then you have less chance, and I'm not saying no, but less chance that when the experiment occurs, that people that may have a political agenda or just don't like you or your team or whatever are going to come at you and say, oh, wow, point the finger at them and say, look, they failed, when failure was exactly what you expected for part of what your experiment was. So I think, to me, the biggest part is, and I think you see this in public speaking, of know your audience. So make sure that you know your audience, make sure you've educated your audience on what your experiment is. So I think that's the biggest thing I could share with people.
So in a sense, I mean, I took a lot of science, as probably all of us did when we were in school, and use the scientific method, right? Like have a plan for what you're going to do and know what your outcomes or what you're testing, and then test appropriately.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
And embrace failure, right? I mean, that's what, right? Because the cost of that failure is very low from a cloud perspective. I use the example, one of our clients decided and wanted to ingest, it was 149,000 full human genomes. It's a lot of data, right? And the beauty is that they experimented on 10,000, 15,000, or what have you, and there were failures there. But we were there right with them, and we iterated with them. And then on one, evening, spun up a massive amount of compute nodes for about 2.5 hours. And 1 trillion data points later, when it was done, it worked. And we turned it off. So I think the cloud says, hey, you want to, and this was not a massive Fortune 5 company. This was a small company that knew that the investment that they could make in spending a couple, tens of thousands of dollars of doing something, and then it pays off because now they do what the big guys used to only be able to do. They had enough compute every client of Snowflake has the same amount of compute available to them as the biggest clients in the world at any point in time. And so they should embrace that and use that.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So I was just thinking about something before we go on to, I want to get to Max here in a second, but I was just thinking, this is kind of maybe off topic, but it seems like if you were talking about your experimentation and problems and solving them, it seems like along with you solving problems, in your own experiments, it seems like the cloud providers are also solving those problems behind the scenes. So you have an awkward situation in cloud and you're like, well, I can't use this solution because it's difficult, so I'll go to another cloud. Well, that's incentive for them to improve that situation. And I see that over and over again. What you researched last year may not be the same this year, right? There may be a new service available to you that actually 100% solves that critical issue you were facing and opens the door for you. So probably, experimenting over and over again, maybe in these kinds of situations might help, or at least paying attention to what new services are being offered, because it may change your outlook for the future.
Yeah, I look at what many years ago, how Jira started and what Atlassian has become. I discounted Jira early on, and I used a competitor, which I'm not even going to name. I'm not even going to go there. But then, I probably should have really dug in maybe more into where Jira was headed and more in their roadmap to then recognize what it's become today. So if those of you have been around long enough that remember how Jira started, it wasn't mind blowing, but I think you have to be pretty impressed with what they've done since. So.
Yeah,
yes, go back and try it. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was on the opposite side. I was a very early adopter of Jira. I love the enterprise version where you could have multiple workflows, or configure multiple workflows. That really made sense to me from very early on, and then I was actually surprised at how well they took off. Not because that Jira itself was, I felt it was a good tool, but like what Atlassian has become is so much more than Jira.
They've done a pretty good job of embracing cloud as well, right? They've managed both sides of that, right? Both on-prem and cloud. So
yeah, cool. So Max, Jira is actually a good transition to this topic. So it seems like agile and cloud experimentation kind of go together, and you sort of brought this up earlier. So in a previous conversation. So tell me a little bit about how you think that fits together and your personal experience with that.
Sure. Big Jira fan, by the way. So my agile, I guess, journey started before cloud journey, right? And so as a team, of course, as most of people out there, we embrace the whole self-organization, being self-sufficient, right? I can't say we spent a lot of time experimenting because that's culturally takes a while to achieve. The goal was to deliver products faster, and but we did follow the ceremonies, right? And the one that was extremely important to us was retrospectives. And time again, the team will get together and we'll discuss the bottlenecks, of course, and how long it takes to provision hardware, software that should be installed on that hardware, right? Kind of a typical dilemma. And the answer to that, well, you just have to enter your tickets a bit ahead of time. And so you just plan a little better, and then you'll get what you need, when you need it. Which of course went slightly against the whole agile, because we did start many things without truly knowing what we might need, right? And so I can't say we were really improving or going fast enough because we did have some massive dependencies. So once we started doing the cloud adoption, that's when I felt that it was really enabling the agility, right? So we removed the dependency, we had the power to get the tools we need. We didn't have to learn too much, right? Because of the abstraction of what it's about how to use the cloud, provision the service, but didn't need to know how to install Hadoop cluster, but did have to know how to use it. But there's a difference. So we started getting faster, right? And the bottleneck on what I would call infrastructure, DevOps side started getting removed by using cloud services. And that really fueled the team. And then, of course, we started looking into actual what we would call our core responsibilities around development and how we can get faster at that stage. So to me, in my experience, the two really go well together. And at least in my case, we really couldn't, we weren't really agile until we started using the cloud.
Yeah, thanks for that story, Max. Yeah, it makes sense. Removing obstacles, being able to not have to do as much pre-planning in order to get to things. I mean, that is very agile, and the cloud does enable that. So we have another question from the audience, I hear.
Yeah,
Jill?
I have Sabu has a question for us. Let me unmute him real quick. Sabu, you're unmuted if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
All right, thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. So if you're, I know you work with multiple customers on, so if a customer gives you a requirement and of course a ballpark price, would you be able to come up? Is it easy to come up with a solution that will be sort of vendor agnostic or cloud agnostic, or it has to be a lock-in type of situation? So my real question is how easy it is to come up with a solution given the requirements.
That's a problem.
Yeah, can I clarify the question? So is there a requirement to be agnostic, or is the question is just kind of putting together a solution, provide a quote of possible architecture?
It's the latter. They want a solution, but how would you advise? Would you look at digging deeper and get locked in, or would you keep your options open with being agnostic?
Oh, I see. So I mean, I can take a crack at this one. So to me, so once you get through the whole requirements, understanding and make sure that you're not attacking the symptoms and so on, what you want to do first is actually what I would call establish HLA, the high-level architecture, of what the solution should look like, and don't dive too deep too quickly as far as what the components will be. So you want to make sure you address it from very beginning to end. And then from there, you could transition into specific components. And typically, folks will use one provider to demonstrate how it can be done and for estimation. But in reality, unless there's something very, very specific, you should be able to do it across all three common clouds like we have on the screen, GCP, Azure, or AWS. Now there is there could be a question around what do they currently use, what kind of systems they have, what skill sets they have in-house, so there could be, maybe just easier to integrate, easier to maintain going forward. But I think either cloud could be used for the high-level estimate because they are still, they're very competitive cost-wise.
Yeah, that's interesting. In that question, there's sort of this idea of like, what's the business need, right? So probably technology shouldn't precede the business goals. And so maybe learning more about the business goals would be a good idea, and expanding out. Do they have limitations? Are they not allowed to use one cloud over another? Do they need to be
and the reason for me to ask that question was that our customers ask for advice. So we say we have multi-cloud. We work with all cloud providers, and the first question they ask you is, can you advise? Please advise. So there we sort of get a little whether we should do single cloud or be open wherever the cost optimization can be, and how do you come up with a solution in that case? So that was the motivation for me to ask my question. Anyway, I think I got a feel. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can add, I think we've created a blessing and a curse with Snowflake because of the fact that we book revenue. This is a public statement. We book revenue on consumption. So when someone signs a 3-year deal with us and commits to a number, we don't recognize that revenue until they actually consume it. Now, imagine that you've built, as I did, products on top of Snowflake. How do you price that, right? How do you price that product to your consumer, and how do you manage that risk of consumption versus do you do a flat fee for service, and what if they start consuming the heck out of it, and how do you do that? And I think we've created a bit of a challenge there, and we recognize that, but it has forced everyone to rethink about aligning your incentives. And I look at it whenever you're building a solution for someone is how do we achieve joint success? What is, back to your point, Mike, about the business, is what's the business goal? What's the and if you're building a solution for someone, what are you trying? What is the revenue targets? What are you trying to do? And let's be successful in that together, and let's both have the downside risk as well. So I recognize the complexity there, but I think it does force people to align more to business goals than just having a fixed cost perspective.
Yeah, and on the topic of cost, it really depends on usage profile, right? So what are the users doing? How often are they doing it? That may change your opinion of, do you use, serverless technology, or do you use, just standard compute in a Docker container? There's other business decisions that sort of drive these factors that, technology alone, there's no one obvious solution, I think, I think that's the golden answer to this webcast, is that there really isn't one answer, right? You have to look carefully at your business needs and understand that in order to really know what the right thing to do is. And it might change, right? Like in Mike's case, like it changed, after you were so far down the path and you realize, oh, we've got to go another path. Even the Snowflake story, it changed. We want to service all clients, so we got to deal with that. So.
Another thought I had, if we discount for a second the business needs, meaning either cloud can handle them, if we strictly, because there is a common question, like which one do we use? What I've done in the past, we will see, and it's very easy stats out there. How many users are on AWS, how many users are, or companies are on Azure, right, on GCP. And so what kind of company you are, and, like within your industry, what's more popular. Like we know AWS is very popular with startups, small organizations, and Microsoft tends to have a good footprint within, large organizations, government, healthcare. So, which one, what industry is your company in? And then also available resources. At some point, as a professional services organization, you are likely to turn this over to your client. And so where will they have an easier time, hiring resources, with AWS or Azure skills or GCP? Again, assuming there's nothing like really unique that one cloud can do better than another. So those could be some of the data points to consider, factors to consider.
Yeah, thanks for that, Max. So we're running towards the end of time. So let's throw up one more poll and see if there's any other questions while we're doing that. And so this poll is, what configuration makes the most sense for your organization? So we talked about 4 kind of configurations early on, and then there's also this idea that maybe on-premise is right for you. Although even that is becoming less and less of a true business decision and more of a preference. The government might be the exception, but there's even options for the cloud there now.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to close the poll and show you the results.
Awesome, thank you. So lots of people single cloud agnostic, which makes sense. And then leveraging the best of it. Yeah, that's somewhat what I would expect, and similar to what the profile of the panelists here have. Awesome.
Hey, no one said stay on-prem. We made progress.
So Jill, do we have any other questions?
We don't. That's it from the audience, and it is the end of our time, so looks like you did well here. Yeah, perfect. So we fit it into the time. So I'd like to thank first the panelists for joining me, Mike, Todd, Max. I appreciate it. This is a great discussion. I've enjoyed all the prep and time we've had together. I'd also really like to thank the audience for joining. Without you, this would be kind of a pointless experiment where we would just be talking to each other. So thanks to everyone that participated, and I look forward to the next Zip Chat. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.